was reluctant to play Between the Wars because I got a feeling from my audience that they were feeling nostalgic for Margaret Thatcher. But there's another song which I wrote exactly the same time, which is There Is Power in a Union. And I close with that often. And I look in the front row and there's people who weren't even born when I wrote that song who are singing it with their fists in the air because they've been on a picket line in the last year. You know, they're nurses, they're teachers, they're working the railways.
At a certain point in the career of a venerable musician, they may well decide that the time has come to compose some variety of memoir. This week's guest has outsourced the work, not, as is traditional, to some weary hack willing to serve as ghostwriter in order to pay off publicans and bookmakers, but to more than 600 friends, associates, collaborators, and, most of all, fans. Billy Bragg, A People's History, is an oral chronicle of the life and works of one of that rare cast of strummer whose songs have become a soundtrack to people's lives. I'm Andrew Muller, and I spoke to Billy Bragg for The Big Interview.
I don't want to change the world. I'm not looking for a New England, just looking for another girl. I don't want to change the world. I'm not looking for a New England, just looking for another girl.
Billy Bragg, welcome to The Big Interview.
It's good to be here, mate. How big is this interview? God, it's huge. Look at the size of it. I tell you what, I haven't seen an interview this size since the old days.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves. We will, of course, be discussing the new book and matters arising, but I did want to start with a question about an element of your life which is referred to, but very, very fleetingly. And I'm just wondering if, and this is your
Freemasonry again. Oh, please don't bring it up.
It's not the Freemasonry. It's your brief service to your nation. And I do wonder at this point, is there any part of you that contemplates the parallel life of retired regimental sergeant major of William Bragg of the Queen's Royal Hussars?
It could have been Royal Irish Hussars, I would correct you there.
They were amalgamated, I think.
They were.
I looked it up.
It's very true. They are now the Queen's Royal Hussars. But back in the day, the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars, because they mostly recruited from Belfast, didn't go to Northern Ireland. That's why I joined them. So I went and I said, look, I really need to join the army to escape from this dreadful life that I've got. But I don't believe what's going on with Northern Ireland. Can you help me out? And the recruiting sergeant, this is in West London, where there's a big Irish population, he said, oh, yeah, no worries, son. What do you want to do? I said, I'll drive tanks. He said, Irish Hussars, put your name down there. And so I put my name down. Now, what would have happened to me if I'd have done my 9 years? I would have been out by the time I was 30. So I guess I would have been looking for a job for someone who could drive a tank. And there's not many jobs that go with that. That was the sad thing about it, Andrew. The sad thing for anyone thinking of a career in the Hussars is when you've driven one tank, you've driven them all, mate. That's it.
Well, you don't end up driving tanks, as the book demonstrates. It is a hefty tome. I didn't bring a copy because I could have dropped it on the table with a satisfying whump. Yeah. But why take that approach? Because to explain what you've done here, it's a people's history, so there's some things written by you, but there's lots of testimony from people you've worked with, people you've played with, and fans as well.
Hunters, yeah. Well, the people who publish the book, Spenwood Books, they do these fan history books where they invite people who love a particular band to write in about their experiences, seeing the band live mostly. And a lot of them are about bands that are no longer with us, so like the Faces or, you know, a particular Rolling Stones tour. There's a really good one that they did just about the De Montfort Hall in Leicester, which is a really good book when you think of all the people that have played there. And I like it. I read their Faces one. I thought it was really good. But when they asked me if I'd be interested in doing one, I thought, yeah, I would be interested to do it because you get to hear the punter's perspective, which you normally don't hear. But I thought it'd be really interesting if I asked people that I work with to contribute as well. So people like Wiggy, you know, and Vaughan Martinian, who's my kind of American tour manager, and also to write some reflections myself to kind of glue it all together. Because one of the things that I felt was missing in some of their books that I read was a sense about what was happening with the band at the time. And as I say, most of their books are bands that are no longer around. They just did a Clash one, they're doing a Jam one. But as I could sort of sit down and write something about it, I thought that'd be an interesting thing to do. And of course, it totally absorbed me for most of this year, wading through.
There's a lot in it.
Stuff diaries and stuff like that, and trying to remember particularly interesting bits and cajoling my mates and co-workers to write something as well. It was quite salutary experience.
Did you exercise any editorial oversight? Did you cut out any Billy Bragg stole my plectrum that time I opened for him, or he lost me at don't try this at home, or he's a massive Tory sellout because he has a nice house in the country?
Exactly. No, I was expecting some of that because the Clash book is really sad because at the end of it, we all kind of like drift away and the Clash don't change the world. I wrote the introduction for the Clash book and I read it and it was the last, the post-Sandinista chapters were quite sad. So I reflected that in because that's how I felt about the Clash. But that didn't happen. I mean, one of the positive things I was able to do was when I was on the road last year, which predominantly was in the United States of America and Canada, I was able to talk about it from the stage and encourage people in the audience to write into go on my website and you can find the link to Spenwood book and to write up. So instead of kind of petering out, like they did a really good one on orchestral manoeuvres in the dark, which did have Andy McCluskey and the other guy wrote some of that, which gave me the idea for adding to it. But they began with an apology and said that the 21st century stuff is not quite as interesting because it peters out. And I thought, well, the way around that is to get people to write, when you're out on the road. So I spent a year saying to people, constantly posting on social media to encourage people to write now. So we didn't get much of that. What we did get, though, was memories of things that happened, me and my co-workers and pals, that I remembered differently from the way they remembered it. Not the event. We both remembered that the event happened, but the circumstances.
Any journalist knows this. If you ask 6 people who were all at exactly the same thing, you will get 6 completely different versions.
Apparently this was the problem that they had with cutting the Beatles anthology documentary. The remaining 3 of them remembered everything differently. George Harrison was convinced that they only played the Shea Stadium once, despite being shown footage of the second gig. So I recognise that. So what I decided to do was, rather than confront my friends, was to leave their memory in there and let it go as that. It wasn't, me and Wiggy, the first night we were in New York together, we bumped into Keith Richards in a Burger King. It's a great story. But Wiggy's setup was totally from my memory of it. Tiny Fenimore remembered a classic moment when I was with a Scottish, in Scotland, I was with my piano player and the photographer shouted out, "Billy, can I see your penis?" And we were all taken for a moment.
I see the problem.
Yeah, for a moment we were taken aback. So these kind of small things, small details. But then it did make me wonder if my memories were correct or whether time had smoothed over and I joined the dots to make... there's a word for it which I can't remember, but if you see something that's not distinct, your mind will immediately come up with something that looks like that. And I wondered if my memories are working like that already.
I think people who have a life that is in some way actually chronicled are at an advantage and at a disadvantage on that. And it's the same if you've got, a cupboard full of scrapbooks of old music press articles that you're absolutely delighted the internet never found out about because it's there and it's irrefutable.
Yeah. I kept a diary for a lot of it. But consequently, I realised that I couldn't have done that because looking at my diary, I wasn't there at the time. I wasn't in that place on that tour. When was that tour then? I've got the memory, but I can't find the event that fits to. I mean, I think that's just a function of memory, though, isn't it? It's not actuality. It's not, you're not sort of like cinema verite. You've got everything. You've got the basic idea, but where it actually fits into the chronology of everything. And the book is chronological, which does help. But even some of the people who wrote in there, there was a woman who was sure she'd seen me play live with the Minutemen and wrote about the gig. Well, that tour, and you can see posters, there are posters on the internet of me and the Minutemen, but I couldn't get a visa in time. That gig never happened. And we had to write back to her and say, look, really sorry, but that gig never actually happened. That was a hard choice because to put it in there, then more people would have started remembering it. And I'm like, now.
You should have let them have it. It might have been an absolute barn burner.
Yeah, it probably would have been. And imagine how regretful I felt about it when Dee Boone died and I never got to play with the Minutemen, which was a heartbreak. But that's the truth. That's the actuality.
We are going to be dropping in 3 songs from across the journey during this show. And one of them, which we will get to presently, is a very, very old one. And the early stages are reflected on in the book, as indeed are all the other stages. But it's a thing I always wonder about people who go on to make a living writing songs, because on the one hand, writing a song is not that hard. You teach somebody 3 chords, you teach them how to rhyme, walk and talk and chant and dance, and off you go. However, writing a song that anybody's going to care about 10 minutes from now, never mind several decades from now, that's a whole other thing. And when you think back on that point, was there a particular point at which you finished one song in particular and thought, actually, this might be good.
Yeah.
People might actually want to listen to this.
It wasn't that
people I don't know and am not related to.
It wasn't that I thought this might be good. It was that I thought, you know what, this is actually a Billy Bragg song. This is me.
Can you remember which song it was?
Yeah, it was Richard. A song which ended up on the first...
It's on Life's a Riot.
Life's a Riot, but it was actually a riff-raff song. It was a song that I wrote during the riff-raff period. And I can remember coming up with it and thinking, actually, this has... Obviously, it's influence. You can't just come up with art. But this is actually... It don't sound like nobody else except me. And once I realised how to do that, I then got the handle on how to write what I thought was a Billy Bragg song. And the best way to explain that would be a song that is ostensibly about a heroic figure, but then shows the vulnerability involved in the actual reality of relationships. So that's in New England as well. I don't want to change the world. I've been out there trying to change the world. But you know what? I really need a hug at the moment. I really need a hug. Come on, guys, girls. So that tough and vulnerable together, I think that probably ends up being the Billy Bragg USP. That's what sort of people hear in that it's not just the hardcore politics, it's also the vulnerability as well. And that's a really important aspect of what I do, because whether I'm writing about love or I'm writing about politics, what joins the two together is empathy. I'm trying to generate empathy for the character in the love song and for the solidarity in the politics.
Once you get to the point, though, where you realise, I've written a Billy Bragg song and it doesn't sound quite like anything else anybody else does, do you arrive at a particular point, and this may be why you referred to your difficult third album as the difficult third album, do you start second-guessing yourself ever? Do you write something and think, oh, God, that's a Billy Bragg song? I could phone these in all day.
I try not to do that. I try really hard not to do that, because you've got to keep pushing forward and not looking back. People say to me, like, Levi Stubbs' Tears is such a great song. Why don't you write another song like that? There isn't another song like that. It's a standalone song. That's what it does, It'd be like saying to McCartney, why don't you write another Yesterday? It doesn't work like that. The process doesn't work like that. So I'm always thinking about what's the next song? What's the next song that I can stand by and say this is really powerful? And there's a good example on the last album. There's a song in there called I Will Be Your Shield, which takes its kind of inspiration a little from the lockdowns, obviously. But it's saying exactly the same thing as The Milkman of Human Kindness, but in a more mature way, from the position of someone who's writing in their 60s, which is where I am. And I'd rather think that I can articulate the sensibilities that I have in more interesting ways, rather than just doubling back and writing I'm sure you could get an AI to write a Billy Bragg song and we could look at it and think, oh my Christ, is that the general idea of what people think I am? Because it would be a political song, wouldn't it? Because generally people don't think I write love songs, whereas I would argue I write more love songs than I write political songs. But the political songs stand out because nobody's writing songs about unions anymore.
It may look like some tradition to go all that way just to come back, but don't offer me a place out in cyberspace, 'cause where in the hell's that at? Now that the space race is over, it's been and it's gone, and I'll never get out of my room. Now that the space race is over, and I can't help feel that we're all just going nowhere.
I'm glad you used the phrase continue pushing forward rather than looking back, because it does kind of cue up another song you've done for us, The Space Race is Over. As you will be aware, though, and I don't know whether this is what you were getting at in that song, a thing that afflicts, I think, determined political activists, and this applies to both sides of the spectrum, is this retreat into nostalgia, this idea that things were better in the olden days. And I think you will have met, I'm sure, more than one person of the left who wants to tell you that the United Kingdom peaked with Clement Attlee's government in the late 1940s. All those people are always much keener to talk about the NHS than they are to talk about NATO and the atomic bomb. Nevertheless, how do you guard against that? Do you ever feel yourself entrapped by it, perhaps especially as you get older?
I wouldn't say entrapped by it, but I do recognise that there is that element in the way people are interested in what I'm doing. A few years ago, I started doing this 3-night show. The first night I played the set I would play if I came to your town. It's a general set. The second night, I only played songs from my first 3 albums. And the third night, I only played songs from my second 3 albums, so up to William Blake. And everywhere we went, throughout the world, the middle night sold out first. Everybody wanted to hear the really early stuff. And I recognise that, and I'm cool with it. So, we're talking the orange one, the green coloured one, and the blue one.
That's Life's a Riot brewing up and talking with the taxman about poetry.
Yeah, that's what they call them anyway. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed revisiting those. And it did make me realise that as you get older, there's a balance that changes between creation and curation.
Okay.
Because you are both trying to push yourself forward and engage with today in the best way that you can, whilst at the same time allowing people to reconnect with that music that they kind of grew up with. And then even within that, there's an even weirder thing going on that I've noticed, which is that sometime early in this century, I kind of stopped playing. I still do play it. I haven't stopped playing it, but I kind of was reluctant to play Between the Wars because I got a feeling from my audience that they were feeling nostalgic for Margaret Thatcher. And I really didn't want to be the person who was making them think, the good old days with Thatcher and the miners, bollocks. But there's another song which I wrote this exactly the same time, which is synonymous with that, which is There Is Power in a Union. And I close with that often. And I look in the front row and there's people who weren't even born when I wrote that song who are singing it with their fists in the air because they've been on a picket line in the last year. They're nurses, they're teachers, they're working the railways. So that song is actually incredibly current to them. It evokes their present rather than there will be people in the audience who first heard that in the miners' strike and are thinking about that. But those people at the front are zealously into it and are young. It's a song that evokes their present. So that's a kind of strange thing. And you do have to be a little bit careful about it when you have a career as long as mine. But
is it that thing, and I've spoken to people in similar positions who've said something along these lines, that you reach a point where you realise that these aren't my songs anymore. They don't belong to me. They belong to these people, which I guess is in keeping with the spirit of the book.
Yeah, you have to do that from the start. You have to let people have the songs. And you have to accept whatever meaning they put into the song, you have to accept that. Because it's kind of their song. I mean, I've had people tell me about songs and they've totally got the wrong end of the stick of what I was actually singing about. But I'm like, well, that's cool. That's your meaning. You can't be going around, Billy Bragg, I sing these political songs. And the old question used to be, but do these people actually live their lives in the terms laid out in your songs? What do you want me to do? Go around and shout through their letterbox? Don't be doing that. You can't do that. You've got to let the songs go. Some of them, the ones that in some ways evoke the times, they land. And when I say the times, I don't just mean the political times, but the place where that person is emotionally. They land, and some of them fall on stony ground. Others that you think, well, you've put a lot in, they just kind of, nobody really gets into them, and there's other ones they want to hear. And I'm really pleased that I Will Be Your Shield seems to have quite a heavy emotional heft for people my age in my set now. So it's great to have a contemporary song that does that, because I have older songs like Tank Park Salute, which is a song about the death of my father, which, is guaranteed to have that weight in it. But so I don't have to rely on that. There's other ways I can bring it. I have another song that used to make grown men get a bit weepy, which is I Keep Faith. Because the way I used to pitch it, sometimes it could be about relationships, or sometimes it could be about sticking to our principles. And, these guys would come up to me and say, that moved me to tears. And I'd be like, great, mate, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get you to that place where the empathy that I'm talking about, the solidarity that I'm talking about, manifests itself in an emotional way. It's easy to make someone cry by hurting them. But by drawing those emotions out just through a song, it's a positive thing for both of us, both for me as the person who's doing it and for you as the person who's experiencing it.
Are you ever aware, though, or do you perhaps even enjoy sometimes a certain amount of tension with your audience over political matters? Because while they may agree with you, it's always struck me as interesting that you come to left-wing politics from a genuinely patriotic place. You wrote a book called The Progressive Patriot. You are clearly extremely fond of this country, etc., etc. And certainly a lot of people, as you might be aware, on the middle-class English left in particular are not. And I do actually think a lot of their convictions derive from the fact that they fundamentally just don't like this place. And I can remember going to see you play on the England Half English tour and seeing some very perplexed people standing by the merch stands wondering visibly, do I want to buy a T-shirt with a St. George's cross on it? Were you trying to wind them up?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't trying to wind them up. I was trying to draw attention to something that I noticed, which was the rise of the British National Party. And that came and bit bit me in the arse when the BNP took over Barking and Dagenham Council.
Your neighbourhood.
Yeah, my hometown. You know, when you come through politics the way I did through Rock Against Racism, your antenna pick up early on those kind of things. And I just believed that the failure of the British left to be able to articulate a, not necessarily patriotic, but just a sense of belonging about something, you know, an idea of what it means to be English. Their failure to be able to articulate that had left a vacuum, which was really easy for people like the BMT to fill. We'd kind of surrendered that territory to them, and I didn't believe we should. I think the flag belongs to all of us or none of us. So I made that album and made that argument. And there's another aspect to it as well, which was willful, which is when you're Billy Bragg, people often accuse you of preaching to the converted. You've got to do something that challenges your audience, and I'm always trying to find ways to do that. Currently, it's talking about trans rights to geezers my age. You know, they're not particularly transphobic, but they maybe haven't thought about it. Maybe they think it's too much trouble. And I've tweaked the lyrics of sexuality now to be able to make that point in my set, to challenge them to be as relevant and radical as they were back in the day when they stood with the gays and lesbians. This is the same stuff on a different day, look, guys. And get a look on this and try and, you know, send them away with another idea in their head, rather than just we all sing Power in the Union and the good old days. And that is part of it, is that as well, you know, because we've been around the block a few times and we need our activism recharging and our cynicism challenging. I want to do that to people who are my age, who've always been there. But I don't want it to be a nostalgia fest. It has to have a contemporary side to it. And the flag and the rights of trans people and the war in Gaza, these are the issues that are firing up the audience at the moment that I'm picking up on and making sure I've got some way to articulate that.
On a similar line, it comes across in the book very much, but I think it has often come across to an extent that is, I think, undersold in your records, that England's not the only country you're fond of. I put it to you that you're actually, and this is again unusual on the English left, a fairly committed America-phile. I mean, most obviously, you did that lovely album of train songs, Shine a Light with Joe Henry. You both came in here and played a few songs off that a few years ago. But it comes across from the very early stages.
Yeah.
That you just went to the United States. And I like those bits in the book because I remember feeling much the same the first times I went to the United States, that you're just absolutely overwhelmed by it. You think, okay, this place is obviously a total madhouse, but it's wonderful.
Particularly if you start in New York. I mean, that's what we did. I mean, I had 3 nights playing on the roof of the Danceteria, which was a club. I'm not even sure where it was, but it was about 20 blocks south of the Empire State Building, and I'm playing on the roof. So I'm looking over the head of the very few punters who are there, who read the NME and English people in New York at night, and I'm looking at the Empire State Building, and there it is all lit up. I'm thinking to myself, oh, God, I'm really, really here. But then after, it was August as well, after a couple of weeks waiting for the Bunnymen to turn up to go on tour with them, I was starting to think to myself, you know what, if the rest of America is like this, I'm not sure I can hack 6 weeks of it. But fortunately, we got outside, and by talking to punters and finding friends and constantly going there and throwing up ideas at my gigs about, because this is the middle of the miners' strike, and people would come and talk to me afterwards and tell me about struggles that were going on there. So unlike most of your knee-jerk anti-American lefties in the UK, I have actually had the opportunity to talk to Americans. And I know they're not all right-wing Reaganites as it was at the time, that there's a huge tradition there that stretches right back past Woody Guthrie, Joe Hill, as far back as you want to go, even to the Revolution. So I was always unwilling to just give that kind of anti-Americanism any space. I was constantly arguing with people against that. Because in the old days, this is a weird thing about it. In order for American kids to find out about the miners' strike in the UK, they would need to have an English guy come and play some miners' songs for them, because there was no, if you went on tour in the US, who knows what's happening in the football? You just didn't know. There's no way, apart from ring your mum and ask about the results, you're gone. Nobody really can understand how we lived in those days. So
I did literally do that more than once.
Exactly. So, in many ways, I was kind of I sometimes talk about doing Woody's work, but I was doing Woody's work in the sense that I was taking the news about what was going on in the UK, bringing it to America, and then getting input from Americans and bringing that back to the UK and saying, no, the Americans aren't like that. I found this in America. There's people doing this in America. There's a Democratic Socialist of America party. You can't just dismiss them like that. And I've always felt strongly about that, because so much of the music that I loved growing up, I really got my politics from the music of the civil rights movement. That's how I was politicised, whether it was, soul music or singer-songwriters. So that's absolutely key to my understanding of culture work.
Truth will set the people free, but the truth is hard to take when your livelihood's at stake. Better cover your mistakes, and the buck doesn't stop here no more. Buck doesn't stop here no more.
I mean, that does cue up a more recent song, The Buck Doesn't Stop Here No More, which, it's, I think the subtext is fairly readily discernible. Has the last decade or so tried your faith in the United States at all?
Yeah, no. What's happened there and the way that things have developed through Trumpism has been really genuinely disturbing, because it has an incredible destabilising effect on everything. Everything. But the ability of the American people to rise to the challenge of that continues to inspire me, that they've not just rolled over and given up like they did during the Reagan years. They are starting to fight back. I think everybody thought it was, dealt with him in 2020 when Biden won. And this resurgence is obviously much more nasty than it was before. But it does seem to be waking people up. And my music is based on a fundamental faith in humanity and the ability of people to come together to make a better world. So, the thing about the Americans, I believe, is that they can be relied upon, in my experience, they can be relied upon to do the right thing after they've tried everything else.
Attributed Churchill often, but yeah, they're not nothing to it.
No, but they take their time. They take their time to get around to it, but I think they are starting to get around to it. And, if that allows a more radical politics to emerge in the shape of people like Zoran Mamdani to get elected, then, I think that's a positive thing. I mean, you don't have to look at Bernie Sanders, the fact that he was able to not become president, but just have a career. That wouldn't have happened in the 1980s. There would be no space for him whatsoever. So sometimes it's hard to see, but I do find the positives in there. And as the kind of Trumpist right and Christian nationalism kind of curdle into something really nasty, I think the average American is going to recognise that and, ask themselves if this was the country that they want to live in, because although it's a fundamentally flawed society, as is all of our societies, America, I think, is not unique, but special in that it is built on an idea. And that idea, expressed in their constitution, that all men are created equal. And they never really believed that at the time. But as a work in progress, to get to that place, I think they've done more than most countries in Europe to try and get to that place. So seeing them revert to a kind of quasi-monarchical authoritarian state will eventually, I think, the majority of Americans will say, actually, with the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, I think people will stand back and say, yeah, I think this is not right, and we're going to have to do something about this.
We can but hope. We came into this talking about one possible parallel 60-something Billy Bragg. I want to finish by talking about another one. It's from the book. It's an interview with Paul Denoyer from 1986 in which you say, and I quote, "Maybe when I'm 60 years old, I'll look back from my seat in the House of Lords and understand the socialist ideal more than I do now." So, Lord Bragg of Barking, I do have to ask, given your interest in politics and your interest in activism, your involvement in activism, the fact that you met, certainly at one point, many Labour politicians, were you ever tempted, and did they ever ask you?
No and yes.
What were you asked? Were you offered?
I was offered an OBE, which I did point out that, I don't actually think the British Empire exists anymore, so I don't really want one of those. And Miliband did ask me once when he was leader if I fancied going into the House of Lords, and I'm like, Ed, I spent the last 15 years trying to abolish the House of Lords. He said, yeah, but you could do it from inside. And I gave him a look that was like, that doesn't work, don't you? It really doesn't work. They're doing it from the inside. So, no.
I understand there's an agreeable day rate.
Yeah, that's what I heard. But I've always believed that politics is too important to be left to politicians, that everybody should be able to talk about these things without actually having to have it as a job, And the other thing is, Andrew, that I've spent 40 years becoming a beloved entertainer. Everyone really likes me. You read the book. It's lovely. People go down the street, people shake my hand and stuff like that. If I wanted a job where people really hated me, I'll become a traffic warden or something like that.
Billy Bragg, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
That's it for this edition of The Big Interview. It was produced by Tom Webb and edited by Christy O'Grady. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. From me, Andrew Muller, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.